Every single pitch changes the scenario of the baseball game. We trust analytics more than we do our own eyes.
Really, the reaction doesn't really matter what you and I think. It's what the fans think.
A lot of things obviously aren't said on the radio that a lot of people would like to say. And we got enough artificial intelligence in baseball right now, and a lot of them went to Ivy League schools. No, the days of Cal Ripken are gone. The days of playing 162 games are gone, and I think that is a good thing. I don't want my guys playing every day. I want them well rested. Shoot, even a farmer gives his soil a year off.
The political correctness is driving me crazy.
The great managers are the ones that don't win games. They just don't lose games as often. But that's not the last time I'm going to correct you. That won't be the last time you're wrong about something. I'm going to let you know about that. I'm going to take you places that you wish you always went. How's that? And welcome to A View from Center Field. Welcome again to A View from Center Field. My name is Andy Van Slyke, and I have a very special guest, a gentleman I've actually met a couple of times. My first time was when I was coaching in Seattle. And then recently, I had the pleasure of taking my wife down to Cabo, Mexico, and ran into this fellow again. His name is Brock Huard. Brock is a gentleman that works for ESPN Radio in Seattle, 710, and also does college football, basically the SEC. Is that correct, Brock?
Yeah, kind of all over the place now, Andy, with ESPN, with all these colleges and all these conferences having their networks. It basically takes us all over the country now. So, pretty busy doing all that good stuff. And I'll tell you, it was cool meeting you in Cabo. You were by far still the most jacked, ripped dude, I think, on that entire beach in Cabo.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. You're 6'4" and you weigh about 235. I didn't see any fat on you, and you're only 41. I'm 57. So.
I don't know. I think I would take you in the pickup game first. That's all I'm saying.
All right. Well, I'll take it. Brock, for those who don't know Brock that well, first I got to say he's a smart guy. He had a 4.0 in high school and a 3.6 in college. So the intellectual content of the show obviously is going to go a lot higher than it has in the past. So I appreciate that. And
we'll see about that.
And Brock had an outstanding career. He lives in Seattle, Washington, born and raised in Seattle, and an outstanding career at the University of Washington. He set many school records, and he was a left-hander, which is unusual for a quarterback. But he is probably not known, and it'll be probably the best trivia question you can have at your local Catholic high school on a Friday night. He and his brother were the first to start the same week in an NFL football game at quarterback. Now, how cool is that?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, except for the people that followed, like the Hasselbacks and the Mannings, did a whole lot more than Damon and I did, but at least we were the first. We were the inaugural ones, as we like to say.
Right. So, now, since you live in Seattle and you cover the Mariners, and I know football is your first love, you still, when I talk to you in Mexico, have a passion for the Seattle Mariners. And a lot of things have happened in the last couple of years. A few years ago, the Mariners were one game out of being in the playoffs. We missed it by one game, making the wild card. And I think most people, unfortunately, know that the Mariners are the last team in baseball that have not made the playoffs. And I think, the last 20 years is it now?
Yeah, it's been 17, Andy.
17 years.
And you're right. I am I make my home in Seattle, as you said. I have a morning radio show on ESPN, and we're the flagship of the Mariners. And in doing that job on a daily basis, Obviously, the Seahawks have had a ton of success, but, as a guy that grew up watching the Mariners, as a guy sitting in my dorm at the University of Washington in 1995, screaming and yelling and jumping as Griffey rounded third, and that moment and that run really from 95 to the early 2000s where they were the best team in baseball, yet without a World Series ring. There's a lot of us craving that kind of success for the baseball team in town. And unfortunately, it feels like it's still a long ways off, unfortunately. And seeing them in the spring didn't necessarily change my opinion.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. They are so far away at this point. But, the great thing I think what's happened in baseball the last couple of years is you can really turn around very quickly if you have the right philosophy, and different teams take different roads.
Yeah.
You look at what Houston did, building, getting rid of a lot of their high paid players and drafting well, and they got new ownership and brought in a new philosophy, and the ownership in Seattle has always been a mystery, I think, to a lot of people who follow baseball. But the last couple of years, they've made a big change. And one of the criticisms was that they had too many chiefs trying to figure out how to get this thing moving forward, but they made a big change in the last couple of years.
Yeah, they did, Andy. A guy by the name of John Stanton, who is one of the minority partners, is taking over the majority role in that. And John is a little bit like myself, a guy from the Pacific Northwest that wants nothing more than to see a World Series and to see a championship, and is doing everything in his power. And I think centralized, as you said, some of that voice, really centralized some of that opinion, which you have to have at the top, really, I believe, of any organization. And he so badly wants a winner. The problem is, I think the best team in baseball is sitting in his division, is built it the right way. And unfortunately, with so many of their young superstars, I just don't see Houston fading anytime soon or giving them really any room or opportunity in the very near future to make a drastic turnaround.
No, and they're young too. I mean, that's another thing. They're young, they're talented, and it looks like their starting pitching got better this year than it was last year. And that's a scary proposition.
Yeah, what's amazing here, Andy, and I'm curious from your perspective. I was actually at a NASCAR race over the weekend down in Phoenix last weekend. I was there for spring training, and then I stuck around and watched a NASCAR race, and I got to meet Cole Hamels, the pitcher now with the Rangers. Yeah. And he and I were chatting a little bit, and I said, man, it just feels like Houston's playing a different game. And he said, well, they have so much pitching depth that this season we will see, especially in the division, we will see Houston not just go 1 through 5 in their rotation, but actually use guys specific in their rotation, maybe spot 6 or 7, to match up with the Rangers, to match up with the Mariners. They have so much depth that, we may continue to see them push the envelope as far as traditional means in a rotation and actually matchup-wise attack their people in the division. They're just seemingly, Andy, playing a different game than everybody else right now.
Well, they've got a bunch of aces in their hand. And so, they can raise the bet, when you got 5 and the 5 of clubs and the 9 of clubs in your hand, it's going to be awful hard to bluff your way to the playoffs. And rotations your rotation in Seattle is going to be an issue. I mean, when you think about Jerry Dipoto, it seems to be dependent on a guy, Rob Walton, who left baseball last year, left AAA baseball, and it was 0-7 and had a 6.5 ERA. And I just recently listened to his podcast bragging about Rob Walton, who left for not physical reasons, but psychological reasons. That's a pretty weak foundation to be starting your season with.
Yeah, what's tough, Andy, is seeing Jerry this year versus his first 2 years. I think there was some real confidence and momentum with where they were going. His first year, they were like you guys. They were 1 game away. They lost game 162. Had they won, I believe Oakland, they beat Oakland and somebody lost, they had a chance to be that wild card. And then last year took such a drastic step back with historically just historic ravage with injuries, especially at the pitching rotation. And now you're just playing makeup. That Drew Smiley injury, I think we will circle back and we'll see what the Mariners do this year. Baseball is a funny game, and we'll see for Jerry, who's in a contract year. But I think we will look back at that Drew Smiley injury and realize, my goodness, that is such a bummer. I mean, if he could have been the 3 last year and kind of buffered some of their losses and had a consistent season, or at least to his baseball card, I don't think they take the drastic step back last year. And who knows? He may have been re-signed for future years. But yeah, there's some significant loss in that pitching rotation. There is no margin. They cannot suffer any setbacks, and if they do, then it's going to be very difficult, I think, to even contend for a wild card.
So I guess the fans in Seattle, the news coverage in Seattle, it can't be positive coming out of spring training. I mean, everybody who follows baseball, every fan that loves their team coming out of spring training has optimism, but I wouldn't think the meter for optimism is too high then.
No, and I think, unfortunately, it's bordering right now on a little bit of apathy, which is the worst place you could possibly be.
You don't ever want to start there. No. You want frustration, you want anger, you want some of that stuff. That's fine. You can deal with that. Winning can turn that emotion, but when there's some apathy going in, and as popular as the Seahawks are, as big as Husky football has become, as the NHL has made a lot of waves, and they're going to be back in this market in 2020. The soccer team is played for the title, won one of them in the last 2 years in town, the Sounders. It's just not the place you want to be to have some fan apathy. And to me, that will be one of the biggest fights over the next 162 games for them. Do you think Ichiro being signed by the Mariners was maybe trying to offset some of that apathy?
I sure hope not, Andy. Now, if you surveyed 100 Mariners fans and a bunch of my buddies that are Mariners fans, they would say that it was. If it was the previous ownership group, I think I would lend more credence to that opinion. I think this was a matter, and I talked to Scott about it a bunch, Scott Service, the skipper, and he said, frankly, we just do not have the outfield depth either. They did not have 3 or 4 guys waiting in the farm system that was major league ready. They just don't. And when you've got injuries to Haniger and injuries to Gamble and injuries to other guys, it just got to a point where at least this guy is in Ichiro at 44 is major league serviceable for a short window of opportunity.
Yeah.
And if this stretches on, beyond more than 4 to 6 weeks where he's playing a lot, they will be in real trouble. There's just simply no doubt about that.
Well, I don't think at his age, as much as he takes care of himself, and there's probably nobody I've seen, since I've been part of Major League Baseball all the way back in 1983. I don't think I've ever seen anybody commit physically the way he can and the way he does. So even at 44, he can't play 5 days a week. It's impossible. Physiologically impossible.
Yeah, and I don't know where you started to really feel it in your career, Andy, and you played late into your, right? Didn't you play late into your 30s?
Yeah, but, I also played on AstroTurf, and he's, been fortunate enough not to be part of that old, concrete surface. So, but that's irrelevant. I don't care if you, play on grass your whole life at 44. It's just physiologically he can't do it. So you're right. They're in a big bind when it comes to not starting the season with healthy players, and not only not healthy, Cano's had a leg injury in spring training. Cruz,
Nelly's had a leg injury. Yep.
You're talking about some old guys whose bodies are completely different than Ichiro's. These are guys that carry around weight. So how is it that, this may be, in all the years that I've been part of Major League Baseball, this may be the most unhealthy team coming out of spring training that I've seen.
And this is coming on the heels of what was last year the most historic use of starting pitchers. I believe it was 19. It was 40 overall in their bullpen. And I mean, it was ludicrous. It was laughable a year ago. And you're right. We were looking at their 25-man roster that they were expecting, and we're expecting to break camp with. At one point last week, 12 of the 25 guys were not participating in practice.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like a football practice. 3/4 of the way through the season.
Yes. Now, some of them are minor, like it was Ichiro had a little calf and Nelly's quad and Robbie's hammy. And, they had MRIs on all of them, and they're all very minor, but it points to what you just said. When you're in your upper 30s or you're 44 like Ichiro, A, you don't heal as fast. B, you cannot go as hard for as many days in a row. And C, you just lose some of your suddenness, some of your twitch, some of your explosion. And that's going to be something I'll just add it to the list for Scott Service to try to have to manage through.
Boy, you're so right. And speaking of Scott Service, I unfortunately the Mariners don't get national coverage, so a lot of our listeners are probably being educated about Seattle Mariners baseball. Scott Service, the manager, not a big name whatsoever. What can you tell me that he brings to the ball club that maybe some other managers doesn't, or is his time up? And do we expect a change not only on the field with players, but also maybe with management in the near future?
Yeah, Andy, those are good questions. And I would agree, unfortunately, with a 17-year playoff drought, you're not going to be in the national narrative. I think what Scott brings is real relationship with Jerry Dipoto. They go back decades. What I love about Scott is he's worn different hats, not only as a player and a catcher. He worked in the scouting department for a few years with Jerry. He's worked in front offices. He's now gained this experience as a manager. And I even asked him down at spring training this year, I said, year 3, how much different is Scott's service as a manager? And he said, there's just nothing you could do without experience. There's just no substitute for it. And he's like, I'm comfortable in my skin. I know what I am. I know what I'm not. You would really like him, I think, Andy. He treats guys well. He's a grinder. He's a catcher. He knows the game.
Yes.
And I think the greatest asset is, as I said, I think he's pretty well-rounded, knowing how the whole operation works. I also know that he wishes he had a few more arms and a few more bats. Not even in this, lineup 1 through 9, bats wise, when healthy is pretty good.
Right.
But just more bats in the farm system, more young guys on the come.
You're right. And younger legs.
Yes.
Casey Stengel, is not going to take the Seattle Mariners to the playoffs this year. I mean, and my point being is, if given the opportunity, is Scott Service a manager that if he had enough talent that the Mariners and the fans and the players and everybody who covers the Mariners, do they have enough confidence, maybe 2 years from now, if Scott's still around, does he have the tools to take a team to the playoffs? Like you said, they were only 1 game away from making the playoffs. So obviously he's been there and he's done it.
Yeah. It's just so hard to evaluate that. And he and Jerry are tied at the hip. They're both going into the 3rd year of their 3-year deals, at least publicly and privately. We have not heard yet of extensions for either of them. The trajectory's got to go the right way. I mean, you've got to try to do more with less. I think on paper, they're 25-man, Andy, and you may disagree, but on paper, they've got no margin. Their 25-man roster, if it is healthy for a majority of this year, I think can compete for that second wild card spot.
Wow.
And, now I think there's about 6 teams that are there with them. I think there's a division leader in each of them. I think either the Yankees or Red Sox, that's going to be the other wild card.
Sure.
And then the last spot, there's about 5 different teams competing for it. And at least the 25-man with Robbie and Nelly and Kyle and Mike Zunino and Dee Gordon, who's had a nice spring, and Gene Segura is going to score some runs, and Felix and Paxton and Leake, should be able to eat some innings. And the bullpen's not bad. And Eddie Diaz has had a wonderful spring. Mm-hmm. That at least it should be competitive for the wild card. And if that's the expectation of ownership and they can compete into that in August and September, I don't know with the cards they've been dealt, I don't know how you don't keep them around for at least a couple more years to continue the evaluation.
That has always been one of my pet peeves about Major League Baseball in recent decades, is how fast they pull the trigger on a manager, when basically it's the manager is only dealt, he can only play the cards he's dealt with. And I think 25 out of 30 major league managers, given the right talent, they're not going to get in the way of that talent, and they're going to push their team into the playoffs. There's probably a handful of guys that can't handle that situation.
Yep.
But if he's not dealt the right cards, I think it's an unfair thing when you start firing managers after 3 years. And look at the history of the Seattle Mariners. They've gone through more managers
Yep.
than any team in baseball in the last 15, 20 years.
Yep. And as you mentioned earlier, they're the team of all the professional sports, NHL, NFL, Major League Basketball, and the NBA now.
Yeah.
The Buffalo Bills went to the playoffs last year. So they were on top of that. They were on top of that perch as far as the longest playoff drought. And now it sits squarely in Seattle. And I think your point right there, the amount of turnover has played a role in that drought over the last 17 years.
Yeah. When you look at the success of basketball franchises, baseball franchises, hockey's, not the same as the other sports, but I think when it comes to getting rid of coaches or managers, baseball and hockey are at the top of the list. But it seems to me that if you have the guy that you really think can do it, they become very impatient with baseball managers in today's game.
Well, and you know this. I mean, you were here in Seattle. Yeah, and you were around Robbie. Yeah, and you were around Robbie, and Nelly came in, and Felix. Of all of this, we've chatted here for about 20 minutes, and of all of this conversation about all these other pieces and management, ownership, I think and I know, and we talked about it in Cabo. Felix Hernandez is going to be the biggest key of all. When you get paid $25 million a year, when you've been that workhorse for a decade, can you finish the race strong? And that's really, I think, been the challenge to Felix is if you want to find yourself in Cooperstown one day, you have got to finish this race. You have got to put together 2, 3, 4 more years of really good baseball. I don't think it will ever be the dominant baseball we saw 5 years ago as the best in the game.
No.
But can you finish the race? Can you be in that rotation? Can you eat 200 innings, for the next 2, 3, 4 years? You do that. You give yourself a chance to go to Cooperstown, and you do that. You give, I think, this organization some life, but an opportunity, as I said, to compete in August and September for a wild card spot.
Yeah, and unfortunately, his health is a question coming out of spring training.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully,
it actually has been the last couple of years.
Yes. Now, thankfully, this is a little different. This was a line drive off of his forearm. So this is not lingering shoulder. This is not, lingering elbow tenderness. This was just kind of a freakish thing. And I'll say this, I've been to 6 or 7 of these spring trainings we're the flagship of the Mariners. So I've seen Felix for a lot of years. He looks better, Andy, this year than he did when you were around. I think there's been a commitment to realize it. Yeah. Realizing that I've got to do everything after back-to-back injury-plagued seasons. I've got to do everything in my power to, as I said, finish this contract, finish this race, and see if it'll be good enough to get himself to Cooperstown.
Yeah. So I guess if they're competitive enough, I mean, it's hard to draw in Seattle in April, May because of the weather. It's it's an awful tough place to sit out and watch a baseball game when it's cold and it's damp. But if they find themselves, 15 games out at the All-Star break, do you think the new donut bar at Safeco Field will keep bringing the fans into the stadium?
No, I don't think so. And beyond that, maybe we can do another one of these in 4 months. We can chat again. Beyond that is, what does ownership do? Because if you're at that spot, what are you going to do with Kyle Seager? What are you going to do with Nelly Cruz in the final, 3 months of his contract? What are you going to do with Robbie with 5 years left on his deal? I mean, they did not want to tear it all the way down. Jerry DiPoto was asked, I think, very specifically and got this job because they were not going to be the Houston Astros. With Felix and with Robbie and with Nelly, with those contracts, they were not going to just rip the Band-Aid off and tear the thing all the way down. If they're 10 games out or 15 games out, of not just they probably will be in the division 10 games out because I think Houston's that good. But if they are 10 games out of the wild card or 5 games out of the second wild card and they're well under 500, I think there's going to be some very difficult decisions that have to be made in late June, early July that have not been made around here in a long, long, long time.
So you're talking about this ripping up the foundation. Not saying the managerial set. I'm not saying firing the manager. You're talking about erasing what's going on and do what maybe what the Marlins are doing down in Florida.
And to do what the Houston Astros did, okay? Yes. They tore it all the way down, and they were terrible for a number of years. but they obviously scouted well. They drafted incredibly. They brought the Energizer Bunny and Altuve. They brought a Correa, who's one of the young stars, and Springer, and all of the rest. And,
Right.
I don't think, the one thing I think I've learned in baseball, and it's taken me a while to learn this game because it's very different than the college football game I call or the NFL world that I lived, but you cannot be in between.
Oh,
you cannot.
gosh, no.
That's the worst place that you can be in baseball. And unfortunately, that's where they found themselves as well in this playoff drought of so many years. They found themselves way too many times in between.
Do you think it's probably been the history then for the last 15 years? In between what to do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes on paper with Felix and crew, there may have been enough juice there and there was underperformance. And I know that you talked about that a few years back when you left,
Yes.
that there was some severe underperformance. But more often than not, and especially these last couple years, and especially when you're looking up at the Houston Astros, are you really competing for the American League West? Is that what you really want to do? And if you do, then what you've got right now is not competitive. It's in between, and you better figure out a new course of action.
Well, I couldn't agree. That's a great analysis. I kind of had the feeling when I got there as a coach, and it certainly was I was definitely reassured last year after, I really thought they would have cleaned the slate last year, but they didn't. And, part of that is, as a general manager, you've invested all this time and money in the people you believe can get the job done. And when they don't, when it blows up on you, now you're stuck with exactly what you talked about. You're in between, and that's a bad place to be. Brock, before I let you go, I got to ask you one more question about my favorite position in baseball, center field, obviously, the position I played. D. Gordon goes from second base, makes the All-Star, makes an All-Star team as a second baseman, wins a Gold Glove at second base, now playing center field. Is the expectations low, medium, or high for him? I'm not talking about offense. Defensively, to be a center fielder that you can rely on an everyday basis.
Yeah, I think coming into this spring, if you would have asked anybody around the Mariners, they were hoping his athleticism would be capable and he could be middle of the road. I think what they have seen this spring has far exceeded any of their expectations. And I think the biggest thing, Andy, and I was at a game last Tuesday or mid-March, and there's a pickoff move at second. It got overthrown. He takes it from center field and throws an absolute BB to nail the guy at third base. 2 plays later, first to third, it's the same situation, and he actually was a runner coming all the way home, and he puts it from center field over the cutoff guy, and it's a bang play at the home plate. So I think that is the most impressive.
Yeah, especially in that ballpark. It's one of the tougher ones. It's a really interesting ballpark for somebody who's never watched a baseball game in Seattle. The conditions from one day to the next can shift like no other ballpark I've ever seen. One day you can be playing and the ball falls in front of you, and the next day you get the same ball off the bat and the ball's going over your head. It's a really, really interesting ballpark as far as when the ball can carry and when it doesn't. So it's going to be a good learning curve for him, and not only that, you've actually picked up a terrific guy. The guy is very congenial. He loves the game and loves to play and loves to be around people. So it's a really good pickup, I think, for the Mariners. So, Brock, I appreciate you coming up. We're going to meet up again in Cabo. So if you go, text me, and I'll let you share a room right next to mine.